I last spoke before this congregation for Transition Sunday in 2018 on the eve of my high school graduation. When Reverend Carl asked me about speaking for Transition Sunday this May, ahead of my college graduation, I had to take a few minutes to think about whether I had anything to say worth hearing. And I decided I did, though, of course, you're free to come to your own conclusions on that. So, who am I that I should speak from this pulpit again? My answer? No one in particular. Just someone who has lived the past 7 years as best I could. Same as all you. And I don't know about the rest of you, but have these been an easy and chill 7 years for you guys? Yeah, I thought not. But have they had moments of joy and of wonder and of love? I thought so. That's one of the funny things about life. The good and the bad don't wash each other out. They coexist. They overlap, and they intermingle. And I want to honor all of that, the things that are good along with the things that are hard. Because if I've learned anything in these years since I flew the nest, it's that life is indeed hard. That seems to be true for just about everyone, but I tell you, especially these days, but I tell you, being neurodivergent and gender variant sure does not make it easier. It so happens that I often feel overwhelmed and exhausted and scared, and at times I've wanted nothing more than to quit it all, to just rest at last and take my chances with what dreams may come. But time and again, I've gotten back up, brushed off the dirt, and kept going, because that isn't all that life is. In the past 7 years, I've fallen in love twice and had my heart broken more times than I can count. I've lost family members, and I've gained new ones. I've heard songs that stir my soul, and I've read poems that have transformed my conception of what poetry can be. I've seen the Milky Way, a total solar eclipse, and several meteor showers. I felt the warmth of the sun rising over the ocean and the cool of many a mountain stream. I felt the raging power of thunderstorms and the stillness of fresh fallen snow. And when I talk about God, I don't always know exactly what I mean by that word, but those are some of the things I mean. All the while, my journey through college hasn't exactly been straightforward. I had to step away a few times. I didn't always get the grades I wanted. And the pandemic certainly didn't help, but life goes on. I went into college thinking I'd major in history and math, but over time I found myself gravitating towards classes that felt more vital to me, which were mainly in the religion and classics departments. And assuming all goes well with 2 papers on the Quran that I still have some outstanding extensions on, I'll have soon completed the requirements for a BA in classics and religious studies. All that's to say that I've spent a good deal of time these past 7 years reading, writing, thinking, and talking about what different people have had to say about that funny little 3-letter word. Whether they call it Allah, Adonai, Theos, Brahman, or Eru Eluvatar, or even the Dharma, the Tao, the Logos, the Great Spirit, or the Spirit of Life. Among other things, I've spent time studying the Hebrew Bible, the Talmud, the Quran, the plays of Euripides, the dialogues of Plato, the Bhagavad Gita, sections of the Pali Canon and the Upanishads, the New Testament in both Greek and English, and on my own time, I've been trying to learn more about indigenous North American religion, and I've found God in all of it. Being a Unitarian Universalist in a religion department is a bit like being a kid in a candy shop. There's so many exciting things to taste, But you're also liable to get into trouble if you get carried away and start asking theological questions when we're supposed to be dispassionate secular scholars of religion, damn it! One of the things I really liked about taking Reverend Carl's World Religions class at FCC last fall was that it was a bit of a change of pace from how religious studies is taught at Amherst College. It was still non-sectarian, but reflecting on how the material we were reading interfaced with our own beliefs was not only encouraged, it was required. Throughout all of this, UU has been an important touchstone for me. In many ways, I feel like my life didn't properly start until about 7 years ago. Prior to that, my path was clear. Go to school, get good grades, do some extracurriculars, and get into a good college. Once I'd done that, I didn't really know what to do next. I'd never had to make a real choice before. And my regular strategy of applying more time and intellectual effort to any given problem was not working. For example, when it came time to select classes for the next semester, in order to determine what classes I should take, I needed to figure out what majors I wanted to pursue. And in order to determine that, I had to figure out what career path I wanted to go down. And in order to determine that, I had to figure out how to properly weigh the relative importance of doing the most good in the world versus doing what would make me the most happy versus what would best ensure financial stability. And in order to determine that, I had to figure out which philosophical and religious system best reflected the moral laws of the universe. And in order to determine that, I had to figure out how one can be certain that their values are actually correct and not just an accident of their circumstances. And in order to determine that, I had to figure out how we go about knowing anything with any certainty at all. And in order to determine that, you can see how I could easily work myself into a right state over these choices. On one such occasion, I went in tears to the College Center for Religious and Spiritual Life, looking for guidance, some rock of certainty that I could moor myself to. I ended up speaking with Harrison Bloom, a Buddhist chaplain familiar with UU. He asked me about the 7 principles, and if those were something I could feel certain about. We talked about them for a while, and I thought they seemed at least as good as any other set of ideals out there, but I still had some uncertainties. I felt good about the 7th, respect for the independent web of existence of which we are a part, as that seemed self-evident and empirically verifiable to me. And while principles 2 through 6 seemed solid enough, it was the first principle that I really struggled with, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I struggled with it because I didn't know how to prove it was true. And also because there's just some people out there who are doing so much harm that it's really hard to see their worth. I thought about it a lot, and I wrestled with it, and I talked to my friends about it, some of whom suggested that people who do terrible things forfeit their worth and dignity. And as attractive a loophole as that was, I knew it didn't properly square with the first principle. Something that's inherent is inextricable from the thing itself. It can never be lost. Ultimately, I concluded the first principle wasn't something I could prove. It was something I would have to take on faith. And I had said I wanted to be part of a faith tradition, so if other people could believe that Jesus can be a biscuit, the inherent worth and dignity of every person really isn't that big of an ask. What's more, I felt I could verify that believing in the inherent worth and dignity of every person will steer you wrong less often than any other principle you could put at the center of your value system. And once you accept the first principle, the rest flow from it naturally. When the opportunity came to get a tattoo, I got a laurel wreath with 7 leaves on one side and 6 on the other, to remind myself of the 7 principles and 6 sources. So this was it. I'd found the moral bedrock that I could finally build my life upon, the true essence of Unitarian Universalism that would never, ever change. And then it did. Last summer, the UU General Assembly adopted the new values and covenant, and I'll be honest, I was a bit skeptical. In part because of how much the principles and sources have meant to me, but also because I just don't really like change. And I don't know how it was down here, but in the congregations that I attended up in New England, there was definitely some grumbling. However, I also keep up with the recordings of Reverend Carl's sermons, and I appreciated his invitation to give them a chance. So I did. Nearly a year on, and I'm starting to come around to them, even if I still have some critiques. But this whole thing has caused me to step back and consider what actually is at the core of Unitarian Universalism, which has also affected how I describe it to others. In my previous sermon, I mentioned how I had trouble explaining UU succinctly, and as UU has become a larger part of my life, the topic has been coming up increasingly often. I try to gauge how in-depth of an answer my conversation partner is looking for. If they seem like they want a quick answer, I say it's a community of shared values. I've started saying that years ago, and it's even more accurate now, but it's also missing a lot. One time, I was talking to a Hindu acquaintance, and I said it was sort of like Advaita Vedanta, but rooted in American culture rather than Indian. I do feel UUs are on a similar wavelength to adherents of Advaita Vedanta, and also in that neighborhood I'd include, among others, Quakers, Baha'is, Reformed Jews, Sufi Muslims, and some of the chill Christians. But still, it isn't a perfect analogy. If my interlocutor is actually interested and will indulge me for a minute, I tell them, Unitarians were Protestants who approached established doctrine with an open mind and rejected things that weren't in accordance with reason, most notably the Trinity. While Universalists were Protestants who approached established doctrine with an open heart and rejected things that weren't in accordance with love, most notably eternal damnation. Over time, Unitarians and Universalists found they were coming to a lot of the same conclusions, albeit from different angles. The Unitarians intellectual, the Universalists emotional. And they were involved in a lot of the same social causes, so in the 60s, they merged into a new type of church that was open to everyone, because loving your neighbor is more important than gatekeeping doctrinal purity. It's still a simplification, but I stand by its basic accuracy. I believe that to be a Unitarian is to be open-minded, and to be a Universalist is to be open-hearted. And the challenge to us, as heirs of both traditions, is to be both. Being open-minded is hard. It takes a lot of work, and we're never going to be perfect at it, but we have to try. Being open-hearted is even harder. It hurts so much to go on loving this world with all the madness out there. And we're never going to be perfect at it, but we have to try. And it doesn't help that sometimes being open-minded and being open-hearted can pull in different directions, but I believe it's critical to hold space for and honor both. So we all just have to navigate that as best we can. I'm personally a bit more of a Unitarian by nature, but over time I've come to believe that Universalism is the greater part of our heritage. I essentially agree with what Reverend Carl said a couple weeks ago, that these new values and covenant mark something of a swing in the Universalist direction, and I think that is good and necessary. But I also think it's important not to forget the Unitarians, some of whom might be feeling a bit left out. Reason absolutely has a place in our faith, but I also think it is right that we are putting love at the center. Love is the value that undergirds our erstwhile first principle, and much like it, I think that placing love at the center of your decision-making will lead you wrong less often than anything else. While we might foreground it more than most, the value of love, of universal love, is part of many religions. From the boundless compassion of the bodhisattva who voluntarily remains in the cycle of samsara to help others escape it, to the likes of Jesus and Paul, who both considered agape the highest virtue. Agape is a Greek word for an all-encompassing, selfless, unconditional sort of love. And it's said to be the way God loves humanity and calls us to love one another. I think it's also the way that dogs love. They just do. More than anything else, I firmly believe that God is love, and that love is godly.
Amen.
I'd like to close with some words from the 14th century Sufi poet Hafiz, who wrote, "Once a young woman asked me, 'How does it feel to be a man?' And I replied, 'My dear, I am not so sure.' Then she said, 'Well, aren't you a man?' And this time I replied, 'I view gender as a beautiful animal that people often take for a walk on a leash and might enter in some odd contest to try to win strange prizes.' My dear, a better question for Hafiz would have been, how does it feel to be a heart? For all I know is love, and I find my heart infinite and everywhere." Thank you.